She tried not to stare. Everything she had ever been taught, every warning from her superiors, every fear that had kept her alive for months, screamed at her to look away. But she couldn't. The sound of boots crunching on the gravel, the metallic clang of equipment being shifted, the laughter that rang out with an unexpected warmth, it all pulled her gaze like a magnetic force. Greta Müller stood near the barbed wire fence that encircled the cramped confines of the prisoners' camp, her heart racing in her chest as she watched a group of British soldiers approach. The sun hung low in the cold, grey sky, casting long shadows that seemed to dance across the muddy ground. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the remnants of smoke from the campfire nearby. It was late April 1945, and the war was reaching a fever pitch, yet here she was, a prisoner, caught in a moment that felt both surreal and painfully real. She had been in this camp for months, a place that had stripped her of her identity and reduced her to a number on a ledger. Greta was 22, a young woman who had once been filled with the fervor of youth, a fervor now quenched under the weight of fear and despair. Her blue eyes, once bright and full of hope, now reflected the hollowed-out spirit of someone who had witnessed too much suffering. She wore the same tattered grey dress day in and day out, its fabric threadbare and stained from the grime of the camp. As the soldiers drew closer, she noticed one man in particular. He was taller than the rest, his uniform somewhat cleaner, and as he spoke, the unmistakable British accent cut through the tension of the moment. "Steady now, lads. Let's get these supplies sorted and see to the needs of the camp." His voice was firm, yet carried an undertone of kindness that made her stomach twist uneasily. Greta's thoughts raced as she gripped the wire fence, the cold metal biting into her palms. Everything she had learned about the enemy, the propaganda, the stories of cruelty, the images of monstrous men, flooded her mind. She had been taught to see them as less than human, as the embodiment of evil. Yet here was this officer standing in front of her, and his very presence was unnerving. This couldn't be right. These were the monsters, weren't they? But the way he interacted with his fellow soldiers, the camaraderie in his laughter, and the kindness in his eyes as he handed out rations contradicted everything she had been told. Greta felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping up within her, a dissonance that began to unravel the tightly wound beliefs she had clung to for so long. Before she could fully process her internal struggle, the sergeant accompanying the officer barked, "Thompson, focus, we have work to do." The reprimand jolted her back to reality, and she quickly averted her gaze, a surge of shame washing over her. How could she allow herself to entertain such thoughts? She was a German, a soldier of the Reich. She had to remember that. Yet as she looked down at the mud beneath her feet, the pulse of the camp thrumming around her, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Curiosity. What lay beyond the barbed wire? What were these men truly like? This single moment would redefine her entire world. Before we uncover why, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now back to 1945. In the months leading up to this day, Greta had seen her fellow prisoners suffer in ways she could hardly bear to think about. The camp was a grim reflection of the war's toll, with makeshift tents that sagged under the weight of rain, and a constant chill that seeped into the bones of everyone within its confines. Food was scarce, and the rations they received barely sustained them. Each day was a battle of survival, both physically and mentally. Greta often found herself lost in memories of her childhood, a time when she had believed in the ideals of her nation. She had grown up in a small town in Bavaria, where the songs of the fatherland filled the air, and the propaganda of the regime painted a picture of glory and might. She had been a product of her environment, absorbing the rhetoric that portrayed the Allies as a threat to her very existence. Her parents had instilled in her a sense of duty, a responsibility to uphold the values of their country. But as the war dragged on, the reality of her beliefs began to fracture. The stories she had heard of bravery and sacrifice were now overshadowed by the harsh truths she witnessed daily. The hunger, the fear, the despair of her fellow women in the camp, it all gnawed at her conscience. Rumors of new guards arriving often circulated through the barracks, and with each passing day, the anticipation grew palpable. The uncertainty of what these changes might bring filled the air with tension. Would they be more oppressive? Would they see them as human beings deserving of kindness, or merely as numbers to be managed? Greta's internal conflict deepened. She found herself torn between the indoctrinated beliefs that had defined her identity and the new, unsettling glimpses of humanity she was beginning to witness. As she stood near the fence, the encounter with the British officer loomed in her mind, planting seeds of doubt in the soil of her convictions. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting an orange glow over the camp, and as the soldiers continued their work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. What would happen when two worlds collided? Would she be able to confront the truth that had been hidden from her for so long? As she watched the men move about, her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from an inexplicable sense of hope. In that moment, standing among the barbed wire and shadows, Greta Müller felt the stirrings of a transformation that would forever alter her perception of the enemy. Greta's pulse quickened, each beat reverberating in her ears as she struggled to reconcile the reality before her with the propaganda that had shaped her youth. She was trapped in a whirlpool of conflicting emotions, her eyes locked onto the group of British soldiers. It was 1945, and the world outside these barbed wires was crumbling, yet here, in this moment, everything felt achingly alive. The camp was a shadow of its former self, a grim reminder of a war that had spiraled into chaos. The once proud banners of the German military were now replaced by the tattered remnants of hope. The prisoners, mostly women like Greta, shuffled through their days in a haze of despair, their spirits crushed beneath the weight of hunger and uncertainty. The tents were lined with dirt. The air was thick with the acrid scent of suffering. Every breath was a reminder of their reality, a stark contrast to the grand ideals they had been taught to believe. As Greta stood there, she could hear the low murmur of conversation among the soldiers. They were discussing logistics, plans, and perhaps the future they hoped to build. Her mind drifted back to her childhood in a small village in Bavaria, where she had been raised on tales of German superiority and the evils of the Allied forces. She remembered the grand parades, the rousing speeches, and the fervor in the eyes of her father as he spoke of duty and honor. But those memories felt distant now, like fragments of a dream that had faded upon waking. "Look at them!" A harsh voice broke through her reverie. It was Peter Aldridge, the sergeant, standing with his arms crossed and a grimace on his face. Greta's heart sank. He was the embodiment of the soldier as enemy stereotype she had been taught to fear. "They think they're heroes, but they're just men in uniforms. Don't let your guard down, Miller. They're not to be trusted." Greta nodded, but the words felt hollow. She had seen the kindness in the eyes of one of the soldiers, and it unsettled her. It was as if the very foundations of her beliefs were starting to crumble, leaving her with a sense of betrayal and confusion. How could a soldier, a supposed monster, show compassion? Rumors had been swirling through the camp about new guards arriving, and a sense of dread had settled over the prisoners. The thought that they might face someone even more brutal than Aldridge sent chills down Greta's spine. The anticipation was palpable. It hung in the air like a thick fog, stifling their already dwindling hopes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the camp, Greta sat with her fellow prisoners, their eyes reflecting the fading light. They shared stories of home, of normalcy, and of the lives they had once lived. Greta listened intently, her heart aching for the simplicity of those days. She thought of her mother's laughter, the smell of fresh bread baking in their small kitchen, and the warmth of family gatherings, memories that now felt like distant echoes. Suddenly, the sound of boots crunching on gravel broke the silence. The soldiers had returned. Greta's heart raced again, but this time it was not just fear. It was curiosity, a dangerous mix of emotions she struggled to contain. She caught sight of James Thompson, the officer whose accent had pierced through her defenses. He seemed different from the others, his eyes holding a kindness that was foreign to her. As the soldiers began to distribute rations, Greta's gaze wandered back to James. He was speaking gently to a group of prisoners, his tone warm and inviting. It was in stark contrast to Aldridge's brusque commands. She couldn't help but wonder what lay beneath the surface of the man who stood before her. Was he truly the enemy she had been taught to despise, or was there more to him than met the eye? This moment will redefine everything, Greta thought, her mind racing. She felt an intense urge to reach out, to understand the man behind the uniform, but fear gripped her. Would he see her as an enemy? Would he turn away in disgust? The internal battle was overwhelming, each thought a soldier fighting for dominance in her mind. Just then, Aldridge barked at the soldiers to maintain order, his voice slicing through the air like a knife. The laughter and warmth dissipated, replaced by a tense silence. Greta's heart sank as she realized the moment was slipping away. Her chance to connect was fading with each passing second, and she was left standing on the precipice of a decision. Before she could fully process her emotions, she found herself moving, almost involuntarily, towards the soldiers. It was a small step, but in that moment it felt monumental. The air around her crackled with tension as she approached the group, her heart pounding like a war drum. Before we uncover why this moment is pivotal, a voice in her mind echoed, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, back to 1945. As she drew closer, her gaze flickered to James. He caught her eye, a look of surprise crossing his features, before transforming into something softer, more curious. The world around them seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, locked in an unspoken understanding that transcended the boundaries of their circumstances. "Are you all right?" James asked, his voice a soothing balm against the harsh reality of the camp. The gentle concern in his eyes made her heart skip a beat. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, she hesitated, her breath catching in her throat as she searched his face for answers. In that moment, Greta was struck by a profound realization. This man, this soldier, was not the monster she had been led to believe. He was human, flawed perhaps, but undeniably human. Yet the fear of her upbringing clawed at her mind, warning her to retreat, to hide behind the walls she had built. How could she reconcile this moment of vulnerability with everything she had been taught? The weight of her choices pressed down on her, heavier than the hunger gnawing at her stomach. As she stood there, a small voice within her whispered that perhaps it was time to challenge those beliefs, to confront the propaganda that had shaped her life. But would she have the courage to do so, especially when the stakes were so high? As the tension hung in the air, Greta was trapped between two worlds, the familiar, comforting darkness of ignorance and the blinding light of truth that beckoned her forward. The struggle for her heart was just beginning, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was not merely a chance encounter. It was the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything she had ever known. Would she take that leap of faith, or would she remain shackled by the chains of her upbringing? The answer loomed just out of reach. And as she stood before James Thompson, her heart both raced and stilled, caught in the storm of uncertainty that would define her fate. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into Greta's struggle and the unexpected connections that will alter the course of her life forever. If you want to witness the unfolding of this extraordinary story, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Join our community of history lovers as we explore these powerful narratives that remind us of our shared humanity. Thank you for watching. Greta's breath caught in her throat as she stood frozen, her eyes riveted to the approaching soldiers. Each step they took echoed in her mind, reverberating against the walls of her upbringing, the indoctrination that had shaped her perceptions since childhood. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and an inexplicable yearning for connection that she dared not acknowledge. As they drew nearer, she could see the distinct features of their uniforms, the way the fabric clung to their forms, marked with dirt and the remnants of battle. One soldier in particular stood out, his posture confident yet relaxed, his eyes scanning the vicinity with both vigilance and a hint of compassion. James Thompson. The name floated back to her like a whisper from the past, a name she had only associated with the enemy, yet now it felt like a strange, haunting melody playing in her mind. "Do you see that one?" A voice broke through her reverie, and she instinctively flinched at the sound of a fellow prisoner beside her. It was Anna, another woman who had been with her since the war's onset, her voice laced with disdain. "You would think they were here to save us." Greta clenched her fists, the words igniting a familiar fire within her. "They are not saviors," she whispered fiercely, though she felt the tremor in her own voice. "They are the enemy." But as she watched James step forward, offering a piece of bread to a child who had wandered too close to the wire, the facade began to crack. The boy's eyes widened with surprise, and for a fleeting moment, the innocence of that exchange pierced through the fog of Greta's long-held beliefs. This single moment would redefine her entire world, she thought, her mind racing ahead of her heart. The act of kindness was disarming, and she felt a flicker of something deep within her, a spark of doubt perhaps, or a crack in the walls she had built around her heart. Before she could process this new reality, A sharp voice called out from behind her. "Müller, front and center!" The command came from a guard, his tone brusque, slicing through the fragile atmosphere like a knife. Greta's stomach churned. She had been summoned, a summons that could mean anything from a reprimand to a punishment. The dread settled heavily in her chest as she stepped forward, her heart pounding like a war drum. As she approached the soldiers, she felt their eyes on her, assessing, judging. James looked over, meeting her gaze, and for a heartbeat the world around them faded into a blur. She saw not the uniform nor the weapons he carried, but a man, a human being with a kindness that seemed so out of place in this grim reality. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and gentle, a stark contrast to the harshness of her surroundings. Greta opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she felt her body tense, a reflexive response to the years of conditioning that told her to fear him. "No," she finally managed, the word escaping her lips like a confession. "Good," he replied, nodding slowly. "We're trying to keep things civil around here." His eyes flickered with a hint of empathy, and Greta felt the walls around her heart tremble once more. But then the guard stepped in, his presence a cold shadow looming over their interaction. "Don't get too comfortable, Müller," he sneered. "You're still a prisoner." James straightened, his expression hardening momentarily. "Just checking on her," he stated firmly, the authority in his voice surprising even himself. The guards scoffed but stepped back, giving them space, albeit reluctantly. In that brief moment of reprieve, something surged within Greta, a mix of confusion and a need to bridge the chasm that had separated them. She took a tentative step closer, her heart racing as she caught a glimpse of the photo peeking from James's breast pocket, a family, smiling, frozen in a moment of peace. "You have a family?" she asked, the question spilling out before she could stop it. There was a vulnerability in her voice, an openness that felt foreign yet liberating. James's gaze softened, and he pulled the photo out, holding it delicately between his fingers. "This is my sister and her children," he said, his tone laced with warmth that contrasted sharply with the chill of their reality. "I just want to get back to them." Greta's heart squeezed painfully in her chest. The soldiers she had been taught to view as monsters had families, dreams, and lives beyond the battlefield. This couldn't be right. These were the monsters, weren't they? The thought echoed in her mind, battling against the deep-rooted beliefs she had clung to for so long. In that charged silence, James shifted slightly, his eyes searching hers as if trying to unravel the complexities of her thoughts. "We're not all the same, you know," he said quietly, a plea wrapped in his words. "We're just trying to survive, just like you." A memory flashed through Greta's mind, a classroom filled with children, their faces eager as a teacher drummed into them the evils of the enemy, the horrors they were capable of. But standing here, facing James, she felt the weight of those lessons slipping away. Suddenly, the guard's voice broke through their moment. "Enough chit-chat," he barked, moving closer. "Müller, get back in line." The warmth that had begun to blossom in Greta's chest cooled instantly, the reality of her situation crashing down on her with a vengeance. She turned to obey, but not before stealing one last look at James. In that fleeting instant, something shifted irrevocably within her. The image of him, the kind smile, the gentle manner, the way he had treated her not as an enemy but as a person, burrowed into her heart, challenging everything she had ever known. As she shuffled back to the line of prisoners, an unexpected twist of fate played out in her mind. The war was not just a series of battles fought on distant fields. It was a tapestry of lives intertwined, a living, breathing entity made of joy and sorrow, hope and despair. Days passed, each one blending into the next, but Greta could not shake the memory of James from her thoughts. In her dreams she saw his face, not the soldier she had feared, but a man grappling with his own struggles, a man who had shown her humanity in a place devoid of it. And then one fateful evening, when the camp was quiet and the guards were exchanging stories under the dim light of a flickering lantern, she found herself standing by the fence, staring into the darkness beyond. "Hey," a voice called softly, pulling her back to reality. It was James, his silhouette outlined against the fading light. In that moment, Greta's heart stopped for a moment as she recognized the weight of what was happening. She could no longer deny the connection, the understanding that had been born amidst the chaos. "Can we talk?" he asked, and as the words hung in the air, she felt the world shift beneath her, the defining moment that would lead her to a path she had never imagined, a path toward empathy, understanding, and perhaps forgiveness. With a nod, Greta stepped forward, ready to confront the truths she had long buried, ready to challenge the very fabric of her beliefs. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a woman ready to reclaim her voice and perhaps her heart. The days rolled into a blur for Greta after that fateful encounter with James Thompson. Initially, she had been consumed by confusion, grappling with the dissonance between her long-held beliefs and the stark reality that unfolded before her. The image of the British soldier's kind eyes haunted her thoughts, a gentle ghost that refused to fade away. She found herself replaying the moment over and over, each time feeling the warmth of humanity seep through the layers of hatred and fear she had been taught to embrace. As the sun rose each morning over the camp, casting a golden hue on the barbed wire that surrounded her, Greta felt a shift within her heart. It was as if a long-forgotten part of her had begun to stir, awakening from a deep slumber. The cold, hard shell of her indoctrination was cracking, and with it came a rush of vulnerability that she had never allowed herself to experience before. In the days following her encounter with James, she observed the British soldiers with a newfound sense of curiosity rather than fear. She noticed the way they interacted with one another, their laughter echoing even in the bleakness of their circumstances. She saw them sharing rations, a small act of camaraderie that struck her deeply. These men were not monsters, they were human beings just like her. One afternoon, while she sat on the damp ground, her thoughts swirling in a chaotic dance, Greta spotted James again. He was sitting on a crate, his head tilted back, eyes closed as he soaked in the rare warmth of the sun. An impulse surged through her, one that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. She took a deep breath, steeling herself against the voice in her head that warned her against such folly, and pushed herself to her feet. As she approached him, the sound of her footsteps drew his attention. He opened his eyes, surprise flickering across his face as he met her gaze. Greta hesitated for a moment, the weight of her past beliefs crashing down on her like a wave. But then she forged ahead, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "James," she said, testing the name on her tongue, "can we talk?" His expression softened. "Of course, Greta," he replied, his tone gentle and inviting. "What's on your mind?" In that moment, the world around them faded into a soft background hum, and it was just the two of them. Greta found herself sitting beside him, the distance that had once felt insurmountable, now shrinking into nothingness. She opened up, sharing her fears and the confusion that had settled in her heart since their last encounter. Each word was a step away from the shadow of her upbringing, a release of the burdens that had weighed her down for so long. James listened intently, nodding as she spoke. "I can't help but feel ashamed," she confessed, her voice quivering. "I was taught to see you as the enemy, as someone to fear. But now I don't see a monster. I see a man who cares." His response was immediate and sincere. "Greta, we're all just people caught in an awful war. It's easy to lose sight of that when fear is the lens through which we see each other. But kindness is the antidote to hatred." As the days turned into weeks, Greta found herself seeking out opportunities to connect with the soldiers. She would watch them as they shared stories of home, their laughter resonating through the camp, creating small pockets of warmth amid the chill of her harsh reality. She began to assist them whenever she could, collecting firewood and helping with the meager meals they prepared. Each interaction was a thread weaving a new tapestry of understanding and compassion between them. Her heart began to expand, filled with empathy and a desire to bridge the chasm that once seemed unbridgeable. She found herself drawn to James's kindness in particular, often feeling a flutter of something new and bittersweet when he was near. Their conversations deepened, moving from the mundane to the philosophical as they shared their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets. Greta learned that James had a family waiting for him, a wife and young daughter, who were his guiding lights through the darkness of war. In turn, she revealed her own dreams of a peaceful Germany, a place where children could play without fear and families could come together without the specter of war looming over them. As they spoke, Greta felt the chains of her past loosen, the weight of indoctrination lifting as she embraced a new narrative, one that was rooted in shared humanity rather than division. But the reality of their situation was never far away. The war was still raging, and with each passing day the camp felt more precarious. Rumors swirled, whispers of impending change, of liberation and uncertainty. As whispers of surrender and peace began to fill the air, Greta found herself reflecting deeply on the transformation that had taken place within her. Then, one fateful morning, the camp erupted in a flurry of movement. Soldiers were shouting, orders were being barked out, and the atmosphere crackled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The British forces were preparing to march forward, the war drawing to a close. Greta's heart raced. She felt exhilaration, but also a pang of fear at the thought of the unknown. As she stood among her fellow prisoners, she spotted James across the yard. Their eyes met and she rushed over, her heart pounding. "What will happen to us?" she asked, her voice laced with anxiety. He stepped closer, his expression serious yet calm. "We're going to be okay, Greta. The war is ending, and soon you'll have the chance to rebuild your life. Don't lose sight of the connections we've made here. They matter more than you know." In that moment, Greta understood the enormity of what had transpired. The walls she had built around her heart had crumbled, and in their place a new foundation had been laid, one built on empathy, understanding, and the courage to embrace the unknown. As the camp began to disperse, and the soldiers prepared for their next move, Greta felt a surge of determination. She would not allow fear to dictate her future. Instead, she would carry forward the lessons she had learned and share them with others. She would speak of the humanity found in unexpected places, of the bond formed in the most unlikely of circumstances. And as the dust settled on the remnants of war, she vowed to be a voice for compassion, a reminder that even amid chaos, kindness could flourish. In the years that followed, Greta Müller would remember those moments with James as pivotal not only in her life, but in the lives of many others. She would share her story, ensure that the lessons learned from the ashes of war would resonate with future generations. Stories like this remind us that behind the uniforms, the flags, and the ideologies, there are always human beings. They remind us that our capacity for empathy is the most powerful weapon against hatred, she would often say during her talks. If you believe that these forgotten histories need to be told, that we must learn from them to build a better future, then join our community of history lovers by subscribing to the channel. Help us continue to bring these vital stories out of the shadows. Thank you for watching. And with those words, Greta's journey transformed from one of fear and division to one of hope and unity, an enduring testament to the power of human connection in the face of adversity.